Welcome to this episode of Washington in Focus. I'm your host, TJ Martinell, and with me is Carleen Johnson. And this episode is going to be about a very hot button topic, which is rent control. And there is a bill going through the Washington State Legislature right now that concerns that. So, Carleen, tell me a little bit about this bill, what it does, and what's causing the very spirited debate that's occurred during the public hearings.
Well, I know you'll remember that this bill, HB 1217, which I think is now like Senate second substitutes HB, these versions work through. By the time it's got that many letters and numbers in front of it, I can't keep up, but it's moving forward. This bill obviously contentious to the point that on day one of the session, this got a public hearing. That never ever happens. You don't put a bill that is, this controversial up for public hearing on day one of the session. I remember being down there and they were running late with all the, the swearing in ceremonies and all the other pageantry of day one. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, 1217 is getting a public hearing today. My phone starts blowing up. People that were against the bill were, rushing down there, scrambling to get to Olympia in person to testify. It ended up passing the full House very early in session on a vote of 53-42. So 4 Democrats joined every Republican in voting no, and then 3 members were excused for that final vote. But this is a limit of annual increases for rent to 7% for tenants. 5% if you are, have a mobile home, a manufactured home on a piece of property. So in a 12-month period, rent couldn't go up. It also limits move-in fees, how much security deposits can be, how much late fees can be, and it allows the tenant to, at taxpayer expense via the Attorney General's office, bring in a court action to force your landlord, your property owner, to comply. So it does have a fiscal note that we, the taxpayers, are going to cover to make sure that renters have all of their rights kept.
Interesting. And this is one of many regulations and restrictions that are currently on landlords. For example, I think they passed a law recently that said that even if you're doing a month-to-month lease, if you want to end the lease, the landlord has to give very specific reasons for why they're not renewing the lease. So you can't have somebody leave your property or ask somebody, I don't want to rent out to you anymore. You can't just say that. You have to give them a reason, and it's your property. So and now they're saying you can't increase it by that amount, which is kind of ironic because now they're also trying to do a separate thing where they want to attach the property tax increase to inflation. I mean, can landlords say, hey, I'd like to index my rent rates to inflation as well? So it seems like they're trying to do to landlords what has long been an application to local governments, which is a property tax rate cap.
Right. And as you mentioned, that property tax increase bill, tying it to inflation and population growth. I mean, look at what inflation has done here in Washington State in the last few years. You tried to buy eggs recently. I did try to buy eggs this past weekend. I got limited to 1 dozen. I was trying to buy 3 dozen because I was making a special recipe. And they said, I'm sorry, your limit's 1 dozen.
You must have received an inheritance to put that.
I found a store where they were cheapest, but I'm not giving it away. I don't want anybody going to buy my eggs. But, at any rate, that argument you just made is critical to what's happening in Olympia this year, because these property owners, developers, if you will, are going, okay, property taxes are going to go through the roof, and yet I'm capped at 7%. And what I've been told by several people that I've interviewed during session as this legislation has moved through, initially the House and now the Senate and now in the Ways and Means Committee, which is where it was last week and still moving full steam ahead. They're saying, okay, you know what? It's going to force me out. A lot of these guys are small landlords, like this one guy I met who is a landlord in Yakima. He's got a small apartment building. It's got 6 units in it. He's got families in all of them, and all are longtime tenants. He said most of them have been in there about 2 years. And he's gone the last 2 years without raising rents at all because he's like, I'm trying to do what I can to fix the place up, but I've told them until I can fix thus and such, I'm not going to raise your rent. And he's like, we have a really amicable relationship and respect both ways. Now the concern is, he said, if they do this, I'm going to be forced to raise that 7% every year to accommodate for that year when everything goes awry, right? When that year, because look at their insurance rates too, right? And all the regulations on them. Everything has gone through the roof for these property owners who will now be forced to raise that 7% a year when maybe they otherwise wouldn't have. So
that really begs the question of, if you have a property that could potentially be used for passive income, like as far as renting, what incentive is there for someone to get into the rental market as a landlord? This is great for someone who's a tenant and who is renting, but this is not encouraging landlords to do. And kind of like what you were saying, they're going to just raise the rates even if they wouldn't otherwise because they're eliminating the ability of landlords to assess risk and say, hey, there's the risk that I have a bad tenant and they cause property damage. I need to be able to be compensated for that. And I'm curious, does the Attorney General's office allow landlords? Do they give landlords any kind of legal resources as well? There are no legal fees that are covered for the landlords in any of these. Now, there are a couple of small caveats, amendments that were offered and accepted into the legislation that is going to say, okay, landlord, if the tenant, moves out with 1 week notice or whatever, here's some of the things that are kind of, weighing on your side a little bit. But by and large, it really is about amending all of these laws to better protect the tenant, and as you're a homeowner, right? So, it seems like you go, I go 6 months, nothing's broke down. My fridge is working. The water heater's working. Everything's working. And then it all happens in 1 month where you got to fix the roof. You had flooding, you had to replace the carpet. Whatever has happened. And so as you mentioned, the property owner, landlord is going to say, you know what? I'm going to have to go with the 7% this year because this next 12 months could be bad. The weatherman says it's going to be bad. Might need to replace the roof. I've got some issues. So they're going to have to do this. And then the biggest thing, TJ, we've got this huge crunch. What did Governor Ferguson say? In the next however many years, we need to build 1.1 million affordable, rental homes, right? Okay. If you have developers looking at Idaho, even Oregon better than us now if this thing passes as far as all the rent caps and regulations go, Idaho, Nevada, and they can build at substantially less cost for regulation, even cost for supplies and everything else, all the building code things that they have to comply with in the state of Washington, and they can build just over the state line somewhere else. They may not want to make the investment here. And then if you don't increase the supply side of it, the rents are never going to stabilize. What it's also going to do is it's not going to, it seems like what it will do is it won't incentivize the building of residential units that are to be rented out. For example, you have townhouses, you have condos, but those are going to be relatively expensive for people. So you're not dealing with the affordability issue, and you're not dealing with people who can't afford a home, but they can afford to rent. And the other interesting thing is, if let's say one landlord in an area is raising his rental rates at a much higher rate than everyone else, wouldn't people just start being incentivized to go to the one landlord who charges a fair rate? That is that not just a reflection of the market? But yeah, if the other thing that this could do is it could lead to a inefficiency as far as existing houses where you have people that maybe would bring in someone to rent in their home in some capacity, but they're like, you know what, I'm not going to take the financial risk. I might get a passive income in the form of $1,000 or so, but I could also have somebody cost me financially and also have legal access to my property and because there's all these other different laws. And Seattle, the city of Seattle has also enacted local regulations around renting that it creates a level of risk that's too much perhaps for small landlords. It's for companies that own hundreds of units and they can afford to take a hit here and there because they're generating enough passive income to where it doesn't matter. And they're the ones that when they raise their rates by 7% annually, they're going to bring in a lot of extra money to compensate for whatever they lose. A small landlord with 6 or 10 units raising by 7%, that's not going to bring in a whole lot of money for them. So
no, you're right. And the other side too is, I mean, I've got 2 kids that rent and the, adult children that rent. I get it. One of them, my son lives in Vancouver and, it's a crummy situation there where the people above are loud and, throw their garbage over the deck because they're too lazy to take it out to the bin, and he makes complaints and they don't respond. And so I get the complaints of the tenant if they're having their rent jacked up and then all these other things. Oh, I found a scratch on the wall. You're not getting your security deposit back. Things like that. I understand that there need to be some protections for the renter. Who's the decent renter who pays their rent on time and doesn't cause any other problems? But this has gone, the pendulum has swung so far in the direction to, not motivate and encourage anybody to, like you say, want to rent out the 2-bedroom house that they own next door. And that is not going to do anything to increase supply. And a couple of people that testified in the hearing I was in last week in the Senate Ways and Means Committee, TJ, were people talking about, okay, wait a minute. I remember early iterations of this bill when it was still being argued in the House. The promise was if we pass this thing through, we're going to do just as many things on the supply side. Well, here's the deal. We don't have any of the bills on the supply side that are moving through at this point. So we've got all this punitive things and discouraging pieces of legislation that may not encourage anybody to want to build here, let alone keep renting if they thought it was going to be their retirement income. And we're not doing anything on the other side of it for supply. So
yeah, it just occurred to me also what this is going to do is that it's going to the people that will benefit I'd say experience the worst ramifications are going to be existing tenants who have relatively affordable rates that they locked in a while ago. But if and when they do build new units or someone moves out of a unit, that gives them the opportunity to set a new threshold for the monthly rate for that apartment unit. And then at that point, on top of that, we can increase it by 7%. So let's say you have a studio apartment that's $1,100 a month. Not sure how optimistic the rate is.
Yeah. I think the average studio right now in the state is like $1,500 from what I looked at on Zillow. Yeah.
So $1,500. Somebody moves out and they can set a new rate. So they say it's $1,800 a month. And they're avoiding running afoul of this if it passes because they're not doing an annual rate increase on a tenant. They're putting a new threshold that's so high that, and this is if the security deposit, you can't have a security deposit. Great. We're just going to have a higher monthly rate. And
they're not going to pay for it somewhere, right? Yeah.
You wonder when the ramifications of this bill occur, the effects come in. Are lawmakers then going to try to cap the rate per month on apartment units? Are they going to kind of try and set, a central planning for apartment units in the state? And it also kind of makes you wonder what's going to happen when the issue of homes that they feel like are not being fully utilized to address, where you have people, for example, who live in an entire house by themselves. I mean,
yeah.
It sounds crazy. It sounds like something out of the Soviet Union, but then again, we're hearing proposals that very much make the case that once you become that the property does not fundamentally belong to the landlord. That's philosophically, if you look at it, that's a way of thinking it.
Well, and kind of to wrap this up, I want to share with you, there was testimony from the mayor of Longview, young guy for a mayor, who testified in the hearing last Friday in the Senate Ways and Means. And he said he's been, working this issue like crazy. He's opposed to the rent caps. And he said 1,000 of the median to affordable, and I don't know what the threshold is, right? It's different parts of the state based on median income for that part of the state. He said 1,000 of those units, he has already had written basically word from these property owners. We're done. We are done. He said that's 1/8 of the rental units in Longview. He said, do you realize what this will do to our community? And where do these people go? The supply side is already just cut to the bare bones. If there's anywhere to go, it's to pay more in rent, and many people cannot.
Yeah. I mean, the big question is, where will they go? Will it remain in Washington state, or will they be like so many other Washingtonians who've departed for elsewhere in the country? But we'll keep an eye on that. So thanks so much, Carlene. Listeners can keep up with this and other stories at thecentersquare.com. I'm your host, TJ Martinell, and thanks for listening.